The needle was cold in Dr. Lauren Hayes's hand. Outside, the wind howled against the window panes of the old shelter, carrying with it the silence of a decision no one wanted to make. Rowdy, the golden retriever scheduled to be put down, didn't flinch. Instead, as Lauren knelt beside him, preparing for the procedure, he did something that stopped her cold. He looked straight into her eyes and smiled. Not with his mouth. With something else. Something deeper. Something that said, "I'm not done yet." Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The winter sun had barely risen over Willow Creek, Montana, casting long, orange shadows over the snow-dusted rooftops and barren trees. A brittle wind whispered through the narrow streets of the quiet town, rustling pine needles and causing the American flag outside the Hope Ridge Animal Shelter to flap noisily. The scent of ice and pine hung in the air. Inside the small, cedar-paneled building nestled near the town's edge, warmth radiated from old space heaters and the smell of antiseptic lingered just beneath the scent of fur and hay. Dr. Lauren Hayes, 34, pushed the glass door open with a resigned sigh, the jingle of the bell above her head feeling heavier than usual. She was tall and willowy, with freckled skin, shoulder-length auburn hair always loosely tied back, and tired green eyes that had seen more compassion and loss than her years should have demanded. Lauren had studied veterinary medicine at Colorado State University and returned to her hometown to serve the community she grew up in. Once an idealist with dreams of revolutionizing rural animal care, years of limited resources, desperate cases, and hard decisions had carved lines into her face and quieted her once fiery optimism. Still, she carried an unshakable kindness, one that came with the burden of always trying to do the right thing, even when it broke her. She rubbed her gloved hands together, letting the warmth of the building seep into her bones, and headed toward her office. The floors creaked under her boots as she passed by kennels filled with soft snores and sleepy paws twitching in dreams. Most of the animals were still asleep, curled in donated blankets or the crooks of their cage corners. Her office, though small, was neatly kept. An oak desk stood at the center, a gift from her late grandfather who had been the town's only vet in the 1970s. Framed photos of adopted animals and thank-you letters lined the wall behind it. Lauren set her thermos down, removed her coat, and reached for the clipboard already placed on the desk by the overnight tech. Its yellow sticky note read simply, "Youth List, Reviewed." Her heart clenched. The list. She sat down, the chair creaking beneath her, and took a long breath before reading. Names, case IDs, brief notes, no improvement. Untreatable. Declining rapidly. Her eyes moved down the page until they stopped at two names she already knew too well, Rowdy and Toby. Her hand lingered on the paper. Rowdy was a 6-year-old male golden retriever with deep amber golden fur, slightly faded around the muzzle. Despite his weakened condition, he carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity that seemed almost human. He had a deep scar along his left shoulder, possibly from an old accident or abuse, and his brown eyes always watched the staff with a kind of patient understanding, like he knew everyone was doing their best. Toby, just 3 years old, was a smaller golden with a paler coat and a timid disposition. His fur was matted when they found him, and he trembled even at the sound of footsteps. The two dogs had been found together just outside town, wandering through the snow-covered woods near the interstate, malnourished and barely conscious. A trucker had spotted them huddled under an abandoned picnic table, their bodies pressed tight for warmth. Lauren remembered the day they arrived. Rowdy had curled his larger frame around Toby like a protective older brother, even as his own body shivered uncontrollably. It was that image, of sacrifice, of instinctive comfort, that stuck with her. She leaned back in her chair now, that memory rising in her chest like smoke. "How did we end up here?" she whispered to no one. The treatments had been extensive, for fluids, antibiotics, high-calorie feedings, heated bedding, constant observation. Yet their recovery had plateaued weeks ago. Toby, especially, had developed labored breathing and intestinal complications. None of the medications seemed to help. Rowdy had stayed strong, but only just. According to protocol, animals unresponsive to treatment with no prognosis for recovery were to be euthanized to avoid prolonged suffering. It was a decision not taken lightly, and Lauren had resisted putting them on the list for days. But now, someone else had added them, and maybe they weren't wrong. Just as she was about to set the clipboard down, a voice crackled on the intercom from the next building over. "Dr. Hayes, just letting you know the therapy group is arriving soon," came the familiar voice of Rebecca, the shelter's admin and part-time liaison with the Children's Therapy Center next door. "Thanks, Becca," Lauren replied, her voice soft. The therapy center was modest, a converted two-story house where kids with trauma or disabilities came for counseling. One of those children was Zoe Marshall, a 10-year-old girl with sandy blonde curls and storm-gray eyes who hadn't spoken a single word since her father died in a car accident the year before. Zoe had been a vibrant, talkative child once, until that night. Since then, silence had become her refuge, and the center had become her mother's last hope. Zoe was known to sit by the window during her therapy sessions, peering at the neighboring shelter building. Every afternoon when Rowdy barked, soft, throaty, never aggressive, Zoe's eyes would turn toward the sound. No one could say why. But recently, she had started tracing her fingers along the frosted glass whenever she heard him. It was small, but her therapist saw it as a sign of awakening. Lauren didn't know about Zoe's background in full, but she had heard bits from Rebecca, enough to understand the child's pain. Maybe, she thought, some part of Zoe recognized something in Rowdy's voice. Maybe Hurt recognized Hurt. Shaking herself from her thoughts, Lauren stood. She would still examine Rowdy and Toby one more time today. She wasn't ready to let them go just yet. Not while something inside her still whispered, "Look again." She opened the office door and stepped back into the hallway, the sounds of the shelter slowly waking behind her. In the far kennel, Rowdy stirred, sensing her approach. Toby, nestled against him as always, didn't move. But Rowdy's eyes met Lauren's through the bars, calm, unwavering, full of something she couldn't name. Lauren exhaled and tightened her grip on the clipboard. "I'm not done with you two," she murmured. "Not yet." The air inside the kennel room was thick with the soft rustle of straw, the gentle clinking of metal water bowls, and the occasional low whine echoing down the tiled corridor. The frost outside had begun to melt, creating muddy puddles along the outer perimeter, but the chill remained, clinging to the corners of the shelter like a stubborn ghost of winter. Dr. Lauren Hayes walked quietly down the hallway, her boots making faint impressions on the faded linoleum, clipboard tucked under one arm and a gnawing weight in her chest. She stopped in front of kennel number 6. Inside, nestled against one another like puzzle pieces that had been meant to fit from birth, were Rowdy and Toby. The elder golden retriever, Rowdy, with his sun-faded fur and calm presence, had one paw draped over Toby, whose smaller frame quivered even in sleep. They didn't stir at her approach. The soft wheeze of Toby's breath was steady, a sound Lauren had become attuned to over weeks of treatment, but today, it carried a clarity she hadn't heard in days. Lauren stood frozen, watching them for a moment too long. She reached for the latch, and the metallic clink made Rowdy stir. His eyes opened, warm and aware, and locked onto hers with a silent calm that unsettled her, not because it was cold, but because it was knowing. Toby shifted, nuzzling deeper into the crook of Rowdy's chest. Her hand paused on the clipboard. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. She had come here with the difficult intent to carry out the scheduled euthanasia. But what she saw, a stillness without pain, a bond without fear, froze her in place. She crouched low, observing quietly. When she gently called Toby's name, the dog did not respond. But as soon as she moved her hand toward Rowdy, Toby stirred, whimpered, and his breathing began to grow uneven. Lauren hesitated, then, acting on instinct, she lightly tapped on the metal bars. The sound caused Rowdy to raise his head slightly, just enough to break physical contact with Toby. Within seconds, Toby began to pant. Eyes wide, Lauren knelt down beside the gate, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. She didn't move further, not yet. Her mind raced. This wasn't coincidence. This was physiological response tied to emotional proximity. Something deeper was happening between these two animals, something beyond what she'd seen in textbooks. Then came the decision. She rose and returned to her office, dialing an internal line. "Becca, can you cancel the euthanization slot for Kennel 6 today?" she asked. There was a pause on the line. "Are you sure?" Rebecca's voice was uncertain. "Yes," Lauren said. "I need time to observe something." "All right," Rebecca replied. "I'll mark them for reevaluation." Lauren hung up, her mind already shifting gears. Meanwhile, across the narrow snow-lined pathway separating the animal shelter from the adjacent building, the therapy center's morning session was already in progress. Inside, Amanda Lee, the center's resident child psychologist, stood at the whiteboard with gentle posture and steady hands. Amanda was in her early 40s, of Chinese-American descent, with short black hair always pulled into a loose bun and round glasses perched on her nose. She dressed simply, earth-tone cardigans and dark jeans, but her presence was grounding, motherly in a quiet, non-imposing way. Years of working with trauma patients had refined her to speak with calm precision and deep empathy. In the corner of the playroom, Zoe Marshall sat cross-legged on a worn green rug, colored pencils scattered around her as she scribbled into a sketchbook. Her coat was still on, though unzipped, and her eyes frequently darted to the frosted window that faced the back of the shelter. Ever since the therapy room had been moved into this particular space, Zoe had claimed that corner. No one questioned it. Amanda approached carefully, kneeling nearby, giving the child enough space not to feel threatened. "Is that a dog you're drawing?" she asked softly. Zoe didn't answer immediately. She was tracing over the fur lines of what looked like a large retriever lying next to a smaller pup. Amanda smiled gently. "I think I've heard him too. Every day, around the same time." Zoe paused, then, with a voice that was barely more than breath, asked, "What's his name?" Amanda froze. Slowly, carefully, she looked at Zoe. "Which one?" "The dog, the one who barks every evening," Zoe whispered. The room seemed to still. Amanda's heart clenched, not just because it was the first time Zoe had spoken in 6 months, but because she had asked a question. A connection had been made. Not to Amanda. Not to a human. But to a voice in the dark. A bark. "I'm not sure," Amanda said honestly. "But I can ask someone who knows." Back at the shelter, Lauren had begun documenting everything. She recorded Toby's vitals when in contact with Rowdy and again when separated. The contrast was stark. Toby's heart rate dropped when curled against Rowdy's side. His respiratory strain disappeared. She noted behavior, position, movement, reaction time. This wasn't just comfort, it was stabilization. Something in Rowdy's presence was affecting Toby's body chemistry. She stepped out of the kennel room and walked toward the front office, where Rebecca, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked brown hair and a personality forged in 30 years of crisis management, was organizing medical files. "We need to hold Rowdy and Toby for further evaluation," Lauren told her. "Something's happening between them. A physiological reaction tied to proximity. It might be emotional bonding, like a therapeutic effect." Rebecca raised an eyebrow but didn't question further. "You'll need at least 48 hours of observation to get the board's attention." "I'll get it," Lauren said. "And I want the therapy center in on this. There might be a psychological angle." Rebecca jotted a note. "Amanda Lee comes in every Tuesday. I'll loop her in." As Lauren turned to leave, Rebecca added quietly, "You've seen something, haven't you?" Lauren didn't answer. She just looked down the hallway toward Kennel 6. "I don't think they're ready to go. And neither am I." Snow had returned overnight to Willow Creek, blanketing the streets in a soft, glowing layer that made everything look momentarily untouched. The town, already quiet on most days, seemed to move even slower under winter's weight. At the Hope Ridge Animal Shelter, the warm hum of heaters and the rhythmic scratching of paws against linoleum filled the early hours. Dr. Lauren Hayes arrived before sunrise, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a folder full of unofficial notes in the other. Over the past 2 days, Lauren had conducted an off-the-record experiment, charting vitals, behavior, and responsiveness in Toby, all tied to his proximity to Rowdy. The results, jotted hastily on scrap paper and back-of-envelope graphs, were as clear as they were astonishing. When separated, Toby's breathing spiked, his body stiffened, and a whimpering anxiety took over. But the moment he returned to Rowdy's side, his pulse dropped, breath steadied, and the small golden retriever visibly relaxed, as though the world itself quieted when Rowdy was near. Lauren had no protocol to follow for this. No study she could cite, no published case in veterinary journals to lean on. But science had always started somewhere, and sometimes it began not in labs, but in looks exchanged through kennel bars. She walked into the staff meeting room that morning with cautious purpose. Seated around the worn rectangular table were 4 members of the shelter's board. At the head sat Elliot Granger, the director. Elliot was in his early 60s, a sturdy man with a receding hairline and deep voice that always carried authority, even when spoken gently. Known for his practicality, Elliot valued data, structure, and funding stability over emotional pleas. To his right sat Denise Clark, the administrative lead, petite, sharp-witted, with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She respected Lauren but often viewed her ideas as too idealistic. Across from her was Miguel Alvarez, the shelter's lead handler, a broad-shouldered ex-firefighter in his 40s with a quiet temperament and a deep love for dogs. He rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. The last was Tammy Sloan, a younger volunteer coordinator with a tattoo of a dog paw on her wrist and an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless optimism. She was relatively new to the board but had quickly become the bridge between staff and community. Lauren presented her findings. "I believe we're seeing a case of therapeutic dependency. Rowdy's presence is having a measurable, calming effect on Toby's physiology. This is not anecdotal. I've documented Toby's cortisol levels through saliva collection, pulse rates, and observable distress markers during separation. Everything improves the moment they're reunited." Elliot folded his hands. "Lauren, even if that's true, what are you proposing?" "A new treatment plan," she replied. "Keep them together. Not just in the same room, but side by side, round the clock. It's a method based not on medical intervention but emotional bonding. I want permission to suspend their euthanasia and pursue this as a case study. Unofficial, for now." Denise shook her head lightly. "We can't build a protocol around feelings, Lauren. I'm not asking for a new protocol. Just a chance," she said. "And I've already received an offer of support from the Willow Creek Volunteer Network." That caught Elliot's attention. "From who, exactly?" "Ruthie Miles," Lauren said, handing over a short letter. Ruthie, a retired nurse in her 70s with silver braids and a no-nonsense gait, had led the local volunteer group for decades. She was a local legend, someone whose endorsement could sway both opinion and donations. Ruthie's note confirmed they'd provide shifts to monitor the dogs and help with non-medical care during the trial. Elliot scanned the letter, then looked up. "All right. 2 weeks. Document everything. And if there's no change?" Lauren nodded. "I understand." As the meeting ended, Tammy caught Lauren's arm. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. "Those two, they're teaching us something we forgot." Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Across the snowy walkway, at the therapy center, Zoe Marshall had agreed to go on a short outing. Her therapist Amanda Lee had gently suggested visiting the dogs she often heard through the window. Zoe's mother, Rachel Marshall, had accompanied her, an elegant woman in her late 30s, with tired blue eyes and dark circles from too many sleepless nights. She was tall, reserved, dressed in a navy coat that had been carefully patched at the elbow. Rachel had once worked as a piano teacher but hadn't returned to work since her husband's fatal car accident nearly a year ago. It had been Zoe who sat in the back seat that night. Rachel's guilt, though unspoken, shadowed everything she did. They walked slowly through the shelter's side entrance, Amanda and Rachel speaking in low tones behind Zoe, who clutched a small notebook to her chest. Inside, Lauren greeted them with warmth but little formality, sensing how delicate the visit was. She guided them down the corridor to Kennel 6. Rowdy and Toby were awake. Toby stayed curled near the back, blinking slowly. But Rowdy stood as they approached, stepping forward with tail swaying gently. Zoe stopped in her tracks. Rowdy looked at her, then sat. The moment stretched. Then Zoe took a step forward. She didn't speak. She simply knelt down, notebook pressed to her knee, and stared at Rowdy. Rowdy leaned forward, touching his nose softly to the metal bars, then stayed still. And then, barely, but unmistakably, Zoe smiled. It was small, a twitch of the lips more than a grin. But it was real. Rachel covered her mouth, eyes glistening. Lauren knelt beside her. "Would you like to meet him closer?" Zoe nodded. Lauren opened the kennel door slowly, letting Rowdy come forward while keeping Toby inside. Rowdy approached Zoe calmly, head low, body relaxed. Zoe reached out, hesitantly, and touched the top of his head. She looked up at Amanda and whispered, "His name is Rowdy." Amanda nodded, her heart full. Yes. They spent 15 quiet minutes together before Zoe stood up and softly said goodbye. As she left, Rowdy sat by the door, watching her go, not barking, just watching. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the board gave their cautious approval for the experimental treatment plan, and already the corridors of Hope Ridge Animal Shelter felt subtly different, less burdened, more alive. The winter light still fell in muted bands across the tiled floors, and the scent of wet fur and disinfectant still lingered, but something else moved through the building now. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe something even simpler, joy. Rowdy had begun to change. Once slow and watchful, the 6-year-old golden retriever now greeted volunteers with a wagging tail and gentle nudges. His thick, honey-colored fur, brushed daily by staff and volunteers, had regained its soft sheen. The scar along his shoulder still remained, but it no longer seemed to weigh on him. He moved with confidence, even playfulness, especially when Toby was nearby. Toby, once the trembling shadow curled in the corner of their kennel, had grown bolder in subtle, beautiful ways. His frame had filled out, his fur had lightened, and most miraculously, he had begun to play. The first time Lauren saw him paw at a rubber duck toy, then look up in surprise as it squeaked beneath his foot, she nearly dropped her clipboard. That moment, simple, fleeting, had felt like a revelation. Dr. Lauren Hayes documented everything. She kept a log of daily changes in behavior, weight, and interactions between the two dogs. But more than that, she also began capturing the details that didn't quite fit into medical forms: how Toby only ate when Rowdy was nearby, how Rowdy waited by the door until Toby stirred from sleep, how their movement seemed synced like breath and heartbeat. Word of their bond began to travel. It started with Tammy Sloan, the young volunteer coordinator with her boundless energy and social media savvy. She posted a short video of Rowdy gently curling around Toby during nap time, captioned simply, "The power of love isn't just for humans." The clip gained traction quickly, shared and reshared by animal lovers who found comfort in its quiet message. Then came the blog posts. The comments. The photos from local volunteers and visitors. And soon, donations followed. People sent blankets, toys, treats, and even funds to support the shelter's new, Emotional Bond Recovery, initiative. Tammy created a dedicated hashtag #RowdyandToby, and within days, it had gone viral in small circles of rescue communities and therapy advocates. Lauren, who had once hesitated to use social media beyond posting adoptable animals, found herself responding to interview requests and answering emails from veterinarians and therapists alike. Still, no digital affirmation could compare to what happened in real life. Every morning at 9 a.m., the shelter welcomed a very special guest. Zoe Marshall, bundled in her blue parka and polka-dotted knit hat, would walk in hand with her mother, Rachel. The moment they stepped into the building, Rowdy would perk up, ears lifting, tail swaying. Toby would emerge from wherever he had nestled, his step steadier each day. Zoe no longer hesitated. She would drop to her knees and greet them both, her soft voice murmuring secrets no one else could hear. She had begun to draw them, dozens of sketches, all in colored pencil, stacked neatly in her spiral-bound notebook. Sometimes Rowdy was depicted with wings like an angel. Other times, Toby wore a cape, his expression proud. One morning, Zoe presented Lauren with a drawing, Rowdy and Toby sitting beneath a tree, with a little girl between them, holding both their paws. "I'm giving it to you," she said, handing it over solemnly. "Because they help me remember I'm not broken." Lauren blinked, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. "Thank you, Zoe. I'll keep this in my office forever." Rachel stood nearby, her arms crossed gently, a quiet awe softening her worn face. It had been weeks since she'd seen her daughter speak so freely. It was during one of these visits, while Zoe was lying against Rowdy's side and drawing in silence, that Rachel sat beside Lauren on the bench and whispered, "She told me yesterday, she misses her dad. But she's not afraid anymore." She said that while hugging Rowdy. The words hit Lauren like a slow wind. There were moments in veterinary medicine that textbooks never prepared you for, and this was one of them. "She'll be okay," Rachel added. "I really think she will." Outside, the snow had begun to melt into slush. Inside, spring had quietly begun to grow in hearts too long frozen. On one particular afternoon, a new visitor arrived at the shelter. He was tall, in his late 30s, with a lined face and a quiet air. His name was Brian Halpern, a wildlife photographer from Idaho who had recently read about Rowdy and Toby through a shared article on a rescue forum. Brian had short salt and pepper hair, wore an olive utility jacket stained at the cuffs, and had a calm presence that made even the more anxious dogs relax. He asked for permission to take portraits of the pair for an upcoming feature on animal healing and resilience. Lauren, intrigued, agreed. Brian worked silently for over an hour, crouching, adjusting light, capturing the two dogs as they played, rested, and interacted with Zoe, who didn't shy away from the camera at all. At the end, he showed Lauren one of the shots, Rowdy licking Toby's ear while Zoe laughed in the background, a blur of color and joy. "This one," Brian said, "is what healing looks like." Lauren nodded. She couldn't have said it better. The sky over Willow Creek was brushed in lavender and soft gold as spring began to stretch its limbs over the Montana countryside. Days grew longer, the snow faded into memory, and the once hushed halls of Hope Ridge Animal Shelter now thrummed with quiet optimism. Every corner of the building held traces of the story that had unfolded over the past few weeks. You could feel it in the way the volunteers smiled, in the way visitors lingered longer at Kennel 6, and in the way Dr. Lauren Hayes stood a little straighter when she arrived each morning, no longer burdened by the weight of impossible choices. It was on a Tuesday morning, clear skies, crisp breeze, pine-scented air, that the email arrived. Lauren was reviewing medication logs in her office, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, when Tammy Sloan, the vibrant, ponytailed volunteer coordinator with a knack for turning anything into a digital campaign, burst through the doorway holding her tablet. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Another news article?" "No. Better." Tammy handed her the tablet. On the screen was a message from a family in Bozeman, Montana, signed by Dale and Meredith Whitaker. They had seen the blog post featuring Rowdy and Toby, read every comment, and watched the video interview where Zoe giggled softly as Toby rested his head on her knee. They wrote with gentle conviction, "We believe these dogs are meant to be part of our family." Lauren read the message twice. It was thoughtful, not gushing. They spoke not only of wanting to adopt but of understanding trauma, of healing in pairs. Meredith, as it turned out, was a retired grief counselor, and Dale ran a small independent bookshop in downtown Bozeman. They had 2 children, both teens, and a sprawling fenced yard surrounded by aspens. But most importantly, they wanted both dogs. Together. Lauren leaned back in her chair, exhaling. "Is this what you hoped for?" Tammy asked. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. "It's exactly what I hoped for. But it still hurts a little." 3 days later, the Whitakers arrived. Meredith Whitaker was in her early 50s, with wavy chestnut hair streaked with silver and soft eyes that held stories she didn't need to speak aloud. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a faded flannel shirt, and she moved with the easy calm of someone used to comforting others. Dale, tall and a bit lanky with wire-rimmed glasses and salt and pepper stubble, had the quiet humor of a man who made people feel at home the moment they met him. Their 2 children, Emma, 15, and Noah, 13, followed close behind, arms full of dog toys and homemade treats. Emma was reserved but curious, with straight auburn hair and a thoughtful expression. She carried a sketchpad tucked under her arm. Noah was the opposite, bubbly, chatty, with a mop of sandy curls and a tendency to kneel down and talk to every animal as though they were old friends. As they entered the kennel room, Rowdy perked up immediately. Toby followed a beat later, tail wagging shyly. The moment Dale crouched down, Rowdy approached without hesitation, nuzzling into his hand. Meredith reached out for Toby, who surprised everyone by licking her fingers gently. It was, unmistakably, a match. Zoe arrived shortly after with her mother, Rachel, for one final visit. She wore a pale yellow sweater and carried something folded carefully in her hands. As she stepped into the enclosure, Rowdy trotted over and leaned into her like he always had. Toby followed, pressing his side to her leg. "I made something for them," Zoe said, unfolding a soft handkerchief, carefully stitched around the edges. On the fabric, drawn in permanent marker, were 3 figures, Rowdy, Toby, and a girl with curly hair holding their paws. The lines were a little uneven, but the joy in their eyes was unmistakable. Rachel swallowed back tears. Zoe insisted on drawing it by hand. "No tracing." Lauren knelt beside her, watching as Zoe tied the handkerchief gently around Rowdy's neck. "So they won't forget me," she said. "You'll always be part of their story," Lauren whispered. The goodbye was quiet. No ceremony. Just gentle hugs, a few tears, and a final walk through the shelter courtyard. As the Whitakers loaded the dogs into their car, 2 large crates prepared with care, Rowdy paused, looked back at Lauren and Zoe, then let out a low, contented bark, as if to say, "It's okay." As the SUV turned onto the gravel path and disappeared past the line of pine trees, Lauren and Zoe stood silently side by side, watching the last trace of dust settle in the golden light. Lauren's voice came soft. Some things can't be explained. Not by medicine, not by science." Zoe nodded. "But love makes sense." Lauren smiled, eyes wet. Across the yard, a robin landed on the branch of a newly budding aspen, singing a bright, hopeful note. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the grass where Rowdy and Toby had once played. It felt quieter now, but not empty. Lauren glanced one last time at the path they had taken, then whispered to herself, "There are things science can't explain. But love always finds its reason." Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come in flashes of lightning or parting seas, they come quietly, wrapped in fur, in the wag of a tail, or the silent healing between 2 wounded souls. The story of Rowdy and Toby reminds us that love is often God's most gentle answer to pain. That when medicine has no more to offer, when logic runs dry, God speaks through connection, compassion, and unexpected friendship. In a world full of noise and distractions, perhaps what we all need is to slow down and listen, to the silent prayers of the broken, the comfort of companionship, and the soft whispers of hope that God plants in the unlikeliest places. Whether you're facing loss, fear, or doubt, remember, healing sometimes begins not in a hospital, but in a shelter. Not in a sermon, but in a shared gaze between a child and a dog. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story of healing. Type Amen in the comments if you believe in second chances, in the power of love, and in God's quiet miracles. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true, inspiring stories, and may God bless you and your loved ones.